Close your eyes and imagine standing at the edge of the ancient city of Chang'an, modern-day Xi'an, in the year 130 BCE. The morning sun casts long shadows across the bustling marketplace, and before you stretches a road that will change the world forever. The Silk Road was never actually a single road, but rather a vast network of trade routes spanning over 4,000 miles, connecting the east and west like arteries carrying the lifeblood of commerce and culture across the ancient world. This intricate web of pathways wound through some of the most challenging terrain on Earth, from the scorching Taklamakan Desert to the snow-capped peaks of the Pamir Mountains. The journey we're about to take together begins in the Han Dynasty of China, around 130 BCE, when Emperor Wu sent his envoy, Zhang Qian, on a diplomatic mission westward. Though Zhang Qian's original mission to form an alliance against the Xiongnu nomads was unsuccessful, his expedition had an unexpected consequence. Upon his return 13 years later, he brought back detailed knowledge of the lands to the west, opening Chinese eyes to a world of possibility beyond their borders. This marked the true beginning of organized trade along what would become the Silk Road. The name Silk Road itself is surprisingly modern. It wasn't coined until 1877, when German geographer Ferdinand von Richthofen used the term Seidenstrasse in his writings, nearly 2,000 years after the routes first flourished. The ancient travelers who walked these paths simply knew them as the roads leading to distant lands, each with their own names and purposes. But why silk? This lustrous fabric became the namesake of these routes because it was China's most treasured export, so prized by Roman elites that it was literally worth its weight in gold. The Chinese guarded the secret of silk production zealously for centuries, making it a mystery that captivated the Western world. Only the Chinese knew that this remarkable material came from the humble silkworm, carefully cultivated on mulberry leaves through a process so labor-intensive that a single silk robe could require the cocoons of 3,000 silkworms. As caravans prepared to depart from Chang'an, merchants would gather goods that would take months, sometimes years, to reach their final destinations. A typical journey from China to the Mediterranean could take anywhere from 18 months to 2 years, with merchants rarely traveling the entire distance themselves. Instead, goods passed through many hands, each middleman adding their markup, which explained why a bolt of silk that left Chang'an for a modest sum might cost a fortune by the time it reached Rome. The routes themselves were dictated by geography and survival. Travelers had to follow paths where water and food could be found, where mountain passes were navigable, and where bandits were less likely to strike. The northern route passed through the oasis cities of the Taklamakan Desert, while the southern route skirted the Tibetan Plateau. These weren't choices made for convenience but for survival in an unforgiving landscape. The desert crossings were particularly perilous, and ancient travelers developed sophisticated techniques to navigate them. Camel caravans would travel primarily at night to avoid the scorching daytime heat, using the stars to guide them between oases. The Bactrian camel, with its 2 humps capable of storing fat for sustenance, became the ship of the desert, able to go for days without water and carry up to 500 pounds of cargo across the shifting sands. Now, let your mind settle into the rhythm of those ancient caravans, the steady pace of camels' feet on ancient stones, as we continue our journey through time along these remarkable roads. As dawn breaks over the desert, our caravan reaches one of the great oasis cities, a jewel of civilization in the midst of an endless sea of sand. These cities were more than just rest stops, they were the beating hearts of the Silk Road, and none was more magnificent than Samarkand. Samarkand, located in modern-day Uzbekistan, stood at the crossroads of the eastern and western routes, making it one of the wealthiest and most cosmopolitan cities in the ancient world. Here, in bustling marketplaces, you might hear a dozen languages in a single afternoon: Chinese, Persian, Arabic, Greek, and Sanskrit blending together in a symphony of commerce and exchange. The city's strategic position meant that goods from every corner of the known world passed through its gates, and with them came ideas, religions, and technologies that would transform civilizations. But silk was far from the only treasure traveling these routes. Imagine walking through a Samarkand bazaar in the 6th century CE. To your left, a merchant displays delicate Chinese porcelain, so thin and translucent it seems to glow in the lamplight. The Chinese had mastered porcelain production by the 7th century, and this white gold was as mysterious to Western buyers as silk itself. They called it China, a name that endures to this day. To your right, another trader offers precious spices from India: cinnamon, pepper, and cardamom, worth fortunes in Roman and later Byzantine kitchens. The exchange wasn't only west to east. From the Mediterranean and Middle East, glassware made its way eastward, a technology the Romans had perfected. Chinese emperors marveled at glass vessels, which were as exotic to them as silk was to Rome. Along with glass came wool textiles, precious metals like gold and silver, and gemstones including lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, which had been mined in the Badakhshan region for over 6,000 years and was prized across Asia for its deep, celestial blue color. Rest for a moment and consider the remarkable fact that paper, one of humanity's most transformative inventions, traveled westward along these very routes. Invented in China around 105 CE during the Han Dynasty, papermaking remained a Chinese secret for centuries. Legend tells us that in 751 CE, after the Battle of Talas between the Tang Dynasty and the Abbasid Caliphate, Chinese prisoners of war who knew the art of papermaking were taken to Samarkand, and from there, the knowledge spread throughout the Islamic world and eventually reached Europe. This single transfer of knowledge would revolutionize record-keeping, literature, and learning across the entire Western world. As you drift deeper into peaceful rest, picture the great caravanserais, the roadside inns that dotted the Silk Road every 20 to 30 miles, roughly a day's journey apart. These weren't simple shelters but complex, fortified structures built around central courtyards. A typical caravanserai could accommodate hundreds of travelers, their animals, and their precious cargo. Thick walls protected against bandits and harsh weather, while the courtyard provided space for camels and horses. On the ground floor, merchants stored their goods and tended their animals. On the upper levels, they found sleeping quarters and sometimes even bathrooms with running water, remarkable engineering for the time. Within these caravanserais, something magical happened. Travelers from distant lands would share meals, stories, and knowledge. A Buddhist monk from China might discuss philosophy with a Persian Zoroastrian merchant while a Christian trader from Syria listened intently. The Silk Road became humanity's first internet, a network for the exchange of not just goods but ideas, beliefs, and innovations. Buddhism itself spread from India to China along these routes between the 1st and 3rd centuries CE, carried by missionaries and monks who walked beside the merchant caravans, establishing monasteries and oasis cities along the way. Let your breathing slow as we consider the sophisticated financial systems that developed to facilitate this long-distance trade. Because carrying large amounts of coins or precious metals was dangerous and impractical, merchants developed early forms of banking and credit. Chinese merchants pioneered the use of flying money, an early form of paper currency and credit notes that emerged during the Tang Dynasty in the 9th century CE. A merchant could deposit money in one city and receive a paper certificate that could be exchanged for currency in another city along the route, an innovation that made long-distance trade safer and more efficient. The Silk Road also saw the movement of crops and agricultural knowledge that would change diets and economies forever. From Central Asia, China received grapes, which led to wine production in Chinese territories. Walnuts, pomegranates, and alfalfa all made their way eastward. Traveling west went peaches, originally from China, and apricots from the mountains of Central Asia. These exchanges meant that a farmer in Italy might grow crops that originated in China, while a Chinese peasant cultivated plants that began their journey in Persia, all without either knowing the ultimate origin of their harvest. Close your eyes and feel the gentle rhythm of these ancient exchanges, the slow but steady flow of goods and knowledge across vast distances, connecting humanity in ways that would have seemed impossible, yet happened day by day, step by step, across the endless horizons of the Silk Road. As we journey deeper into the heart of the Silk Road, let us pause in the shadow of the Pamir Mountains, known to ancient travelers as the roof of the world. Here, at altitudes reaching over 15,000 feet, the air grows thin and the world falls silent except for the whisper of wind across eternal snows. The mountain passes of the Pamirs and the Hindu Kush presented some of the most formidable challenges along the entire Silk Road network. Traders crossing these heights faced not only the physical demands of altitude but also extreme weather that could change without warning. Snow could fall even in summer months, and avalanches were a constant threat. Yet despite these dangers, the passes remained in use for centuries because they connected the wealthy markets of China with the equally prosperous lands of Persia and beyond. Some caravans would wait months in foothill towns, timing their crossing for the brief windows when the passes were most navigable. Breathe slowly and imagine the cosmopolitan city of Kashgar, nestled in the foothills where the northern and southern routes around the Taklamakan Desert reunited. By the 10th century CE, Kashgar had become a crucial meeting point where Turkic, Persian, Indian, and Chinese cultures blended seamlessly. The city's famous Sunday market, which continues to this day, became legendary among traders, a sprawling bazaar where you could purchase everything from jade to livestock, from medicinal herbs gathered in distant mountains to intricately woven carpets that took months to create. Kashgar was also a center of Islamic learning after the religion spread eastward along the Silk Road, with mosques and madrasas attracting scholars from across Central Asia. Now, let your mind drift to something remarkable that few realize. The Silk Road wasn't just a conduit for luxury goods and grand ideas. It also carried innovations in mathematics that would reshape human understanding. From India came the concept of zero and the decimal number system, revolutionary ideas that traveled westward through Persian mathematicians and eventually reached Europe. These mathematical concepts, which we take for granted today, made their way along the same dusty roads as silk and spices, transformed the way humans could calculate, trade, and understand the world around them. By the 9th century CE, Persian scholars in cities like Baghdad were building upon Indian mathematics, creating the foundations of algebra, a word itself derived from Arabic. As you sink deeper into relaxation, consider the role of disease along these routes. The very connections that brought prosperity and cultural exchange also created pathways for epidemics to spread. The plague of Justinian, which struck the Byzantine Empire in 541 CE, likely traveled along Silk Road trade routes from Central Asia, reaching Constantinople and devastating the Mediterranean world. Centuries later, the Black Death of the 14th century would follow similar paths, moving with merchant caravans from Central Asia westward into Europe, demonstrating how deeply interconnected the medieval world had become through these ancient trade networks. The same roads that carried silk and knowledge also carried invisible dangers that could reshape civilizations. Let us rest for a moment in the ancient city of Dunhuang, gateway between China and the western regions. Here, at the edge of the Gobi Desert, Buddhist monks created something extraordinary between the 4th and 14th centuries CE, the Mogao Caves, also known as the Caves of the Thousand Buddhas. These 492 temples carved into cliff faces contain some of the finest examples of Buddhist art spanning a millennium. But in 1900, a Taoist monk discovered something even more remarkable, a sealed library cave containing over 50,000 manuscripts and documents, perfectly preserved by the dry desert air. These texts, written in Chinese, Tibetan, Sanskrit, and other languages, provided an unprecedented window into life along the Silk Road, everything from religious texts and literature to mundane business contracts and personal letters, all waiting silently in the darkness for over 900 years. The flow of religious ideas along the Silk Road created a remarkable tapestry of faith. In addition to Buddhism spreading eastward, Nestorian Christianity reached China by 635 CE during the Tang dynasty, and for a time, Christian churches stood alongside Buddhist temples and Zoroastrian fire temples in Chinese cities. Manichaeism, a dualistic religion founded in Persia in the 3rd century CE, also traveled the Silk Road and gained followers from the Mediterranean to China. This religious tolerance and diversity along the trade routes, particularly during the Tang dynasty, created cosmopolitan cities where multiple faiths coexisted peacefully, a remarkable achievement in an era often marked by religious conflict elsewhere in the world. Picture yourself now resting in one of these ancient cities, where the call to prayer from a mosque mingles with the chanting of Buddhist monks, where Zoroastrian merchants discuss business with Christian traders, and where Jewish communities thrive alongside followers of faiths you've never heard of. The Silk Road wasn't just a path for commerce, it was a corridor of human connection, where differences were bridges rather than barriers, where the unfamiliar became familiar through the simple daily interactions of buying and selling, eating and sleeping, telling stories under the same vast expanse of stars. Let the gentle rhythm of camel bells fade into the distance as you drift deeper into peaceful rest, knowing that you walk in the footsteps of countless travelers who came before, each carrying their own precious cargo of goods, dreams, and stories across the endless road. As the moon rises over the ancient city of Merv, in what is now Turkmenistan, we find ourselves in a place that was once called the Queen of the World. Let your breathing deepen as we explore this jewel of the medieval era. At its height during the 12th century CE, Merv was possibly the largest city in the world, home to perhaps 500,000 people, a staggering population for the medieval period. The city's strategic location at the crossroads of multiple trade routes made it not just a commercial hub but a center of learning and culture that rivaled Baghdad and Constantinople. Its libraries were said to contain over 150,000 volumes, a collection that would have made it one of the greatest repositories of knowledge in the medieval world. Scholars came from across Asia to study astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and philosophy in Merv's renowned institutions. The city's wealth and sophistication were legendary. Its gardens were fed by an ingenious system of underground channels called qanats, which brought water from distant mountains, allowing this desert city to bloom like an oasis. Breathe slowly and imagine the luxury goods that made their way along these routes, goods so precious they were reserved for the wealthy elite. From China came not only silk but also lacquerware, a glossy finish applied in layer after layer to create objects of extraordinary beauty and durability. The technique of making lacquer was another closely guarded Chinese secret. It came from the sap of the lacquer tree, native to China and requiring such skill and patience that a single piece might take months or even years to complete. Meanwhile, from the islands of Southeast Asia came spices like cloves and nutmeg, so valuable in medieval Europe that a handful of these dried buds could buy a house. These spices, originating from the remote Maluku Islands of Indonesia, traveled thousands of miles along maritime and overland routes before reaching the Silk Road proper, changing hands dozens of times and increasing exponentially in value with each transaction. Now let your mind wander to the remarkable story of gunpowder, one of China's most consequential exports. Invented by Chinese alchemists in the 9th century CE, originally while searching for an elixir of immortality, gunpowder gradually made its way westward along the Silk Road. By the 13th century, knowledge of this explosive mixture of saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal had reached the Islamic world, and by the 14th century, it arrived in Europe, where it would revolutionize warfare forever. What began as a substance for fireworks and celebrations in Tang Dynasty China became the technology that would end the age of castles and knights, transforming the nature of human conflict across 3 continents. Rest deeply now as we consider the Silk Road's golden age under the Mongol Empire. When Genghis Khan and his descendants conquered vast territories in the 13th century, creating an empire that stretched from Korea to Hungary, they did something unexpected. They secured the trade routes like never before. Under what historians call the Pax Mongolica, or Mongol Peace, which lasted roughly from 1250 to 1350 CE, the Silk Road experienced unprecedented safety and prosperity. The Mongols established a sophisticated postal relay system called the Yam, with stations every 25 to 30 miles where messengers could change horses. This system was so efficient that a message could travel from Beijing to the Black Sea, a distance of over 5,000 miles, in just a few weeks, an almost unimaginable speed for the era. It was during this Mongol peace that one of history's most famous travelers embarked on his legendary journey. Marco Polo, a Venetian merchant, left Italy in 1271 at the age of 17, traveling with his father and uncle along the Silk Road to the court of Kublai Khan in China. He would remain in the East for 24 years, serving the Khan and traveling extensively throughout his empire. Upon his return to Venice in 1295, Marco Polo's accounts of his travels, describing the wonders of paper money, coal for heating, and the vast postal system, seemed so fantastical to Europeans that many doubted their authenticity. Yet his book, The Travels of Marco Polo, written while he was imprisoned during a war between Venice and Genoa, became one of the most influential travelogues in history, inspiring generations of explorers, including a young Christopher Columbus who owned a heavily annotated copy. Let yourself drift peacefully as you contemplate the slow rhythm of change along these ancient routes. Cities rose and fell like tides. Empires expanded and crumbled. Languages evolved and merged. A merchant's grandson might speak a different tongue than his grandfather, worship different gods, yet still walk the same dusty paths, still seek the same distant markets, still carry goods that connected the world. Feel the weight of history settling gently around you like silk falling softly on skin. The Silk Road was never static, it breathed and shifted with the centuries, adapting to new rulers, new religions, new technologies. Trade routes moved north or south depending on political stability. Cities that were flourishing centers in one century became ruins in the next, while new cities rose to take their place. In the quiet darkness behind your closed eyes, you can almost hear the echo of those ancient conversations, the bargaining in marketplaces, the prayers in temples, the songs around caravanserai fires. Different languages, different faces, different dreams, yet all connected by these roads, all part of a grand human story of connection and exchange that spanned millennia. Let the gentle pace of camel caravans lull you deeper into rest, each footfall a heartbeat, each mile a breath, as we continue our endless journey through time and space along these legendary roads. As twilight settles over the ancient trade routes, let us turn our attention to the maritime pathways that complemented the overland Silk Road, routes less traveled in our imagination but equally vital to the story of human connection. The maritime Silk Road, sometimes called the Spice Route, connected the great ports of China with Southeast Asia, India, Arabia, and East Africa. Ships would leave from ports like Guangzhou and Quanzhou in southern China, their hulls laden with silk, porcelain, and tea, riding the monsoon winds that dictated the rhythm of maritime trade. These seasonal winds were the ocean's gift to traders, blowing northeast from April to October and southwest from November to March. They made reliable ocean travel possible centuries before advanced navigation instruments existed. Chinese sailors understood these patterns intimately, planning voyages around nature's predictable breath, waiting months in foreign ports for the winds to shift and carry them home. Breathe deeply and picture the magnificent treasure ships of Admiral Zheng He, a Chinese Muslim explorer who commanded 7 epic voyages between 1405 and 1433 CE during the Ming Dynasty. These weren't mere trading vessels, they were floating cities. The largest of Zheng Yi's ships measured over 400 feet long, dwarfing Columbus's ships which would sail decades later. Some scholars debate these exact dimensions, but even conservative estimates place them at an extraordinary 200 to 300 feet, carrying crews of hundreds and displaying the might of the Ming Dynasty to every port they visited. His fleets, sometimes numbering over 300 ships and 28,000 men, reached the coasts of India, Arabia, and East Africa, establishing diplomatic relations and trade agreements that extended China's influence across the Indian Ocean. Now let your mind settle on a precious commodity that flowed along both land and sea routes, tea. Originating in ancient China, where legend credits its discovery to Emperor Shennong in 2737 BCE, tea remained relatively unknown outside East Asia for millennia. It wasn't until the Tang Dynasty, around the 8th century CE, that tea drinking became widespread in China, evolving from a medicinal drink to a cultural institution. The famous Tea Horse Road, a network of trade routes through the Himalayas, saw Chinese merchants exchange tea bricks for Tibetan horses, an animal the Chinese military desperately needed and Tibet had in abundance. A single horse might trade for 50 to 70 pounds of tea, making this one of history's most essential commodity exchanges. Rest peacefully as we consider the technological marvels that made these journeys possible. The Chinese invented the magnetic compass, likely in the 11th century CE during the Song Dynasty, initially for divination and feng shui before sailors recognized its navigational value. By the 12th century, Chinese ships were using compasses to navigate, giving them a tremendous advantage on both rivers and open seas. This technology gradually spread westward. Arab traders adopted it by the 13th century, and it reached Europe shortly after, fundamentally transforming navigation and making it possible for sailors to venture farther from coastlines with confidence. Let yourself drift as you contemplate another Chinese innovation that revolutionized maritime trade, the stern-mounted rudder. While earlier ships used steering oars, Chinese shipbuilders developed the stern-post rudder by the 1st century CE, creating vessels that were more maneuverable and stable, especially crucial for the large cargo ships traveling the maritime Silk Road. This innovation wouldn't appear in European ships until the 12th century, giving Chinese mariners a 1,000-year advantage in ship control and design. Combined with watertight compartments, another Chinese naval innovation from around the 2nd century CE, these ships could survive damage that would sink vessels of other nations. Close your eyes and envision the ancient city of Palmyra, rising from the Syrian desert like a mirage-made stone. This oasis city, positioned between the Roman Empire and Persia, flourished between the 1st and 3rd centuries CE as one of the wealthiest trading centers along the Silk Road. Palmyrene merchants were master middlemen, controlling much of the luxury trade flowing into the Roman Empire. The city's wealth was so great that it constructed magnificent colonnaded streets, grand temples, and elaborate tombs that still echo with ancient grandeur. Queen Zenobia, who ruled Palmyra in the 3rd century CE, briefly challenged Roman authority, conquering Egypt and much of Asia Minor before Emperor Aurelian defeated her forces in 272 CE, demonstrating that control of Silk Road trade meant power enough to shake empires. Breathe slowly and think of something as simple as a peach, biting into its sweet flesh on a summer day. This fruit that seems so ordinary originated in China, cultivated there for over 4,000 years before traveling westward along the Silk Road. The Romans called it Persian apple, Malum persicum, because they received it from Persia, not knowing its true origin lay farther east. Similarly, the orange traveled from Southeast Asia through India and Persia before reaching the Mediterranean, its journey taking centuries, its name derived from the Sanskrit word naranga. These fruits, now commonplace, represent the patient, incremental exchange of agricultural knowledge that transformed what people ate across entire continents. Let your thoughts become as soft as the fading light as we consider one more precious commodity, jade. For the Chinese, jade was more precious than gold, valued not for its rarity but for its spiritual and cultural significance. The finest jade came from the deposits of Khotan, an oasis kingdom on the southern Silk Road route in what is now western China. For over 3,000 years, jade from Khotan traveled to China proper, where skilled artisans carved it into everything from ritual objects to jewelry. The Jade Road, as this route was sometimes called, predated even the silk trade, with jade artifacts from Khotan appearing in Chinese archaeological sites dating back to 5000 BCE, making it perhaps the oldest long-distance trade route in continuous use. Rest deeply now as you imagine the caravanserais coming alive at dusk, fires being lit, meals being prepared, the exotic scents of different cuisines mingling in the evening air. A Persian trader shares pomegranates with a Chinese merchant. An Indian monk discusses philosophy with an Arab scholar. Stories are told in multiple languages, translated and retold, changed slightly with each telling until no one remembers the original, yet the essence remains true. The Silk Road fostered a remarkable exchange of artistic techniques and styles. Chinese dragon motifs appeared in Persian textiles. Greek sculptural techniques influenced Buddhist art in Gandhara, creating a unique Greco-Buddhist style that combined Hellenistic realism with Buddhist iconography. Islamic geometric patterns traveled east, influencing Chinese decorative arts. This artistic cross-pollination created hybrid styles that belonged to no single culture but to all cultures, visual languages that could be read from Damascus to Beijing. Feel yourself sinking deeper into peaceful rest, the weight of these centuries pressing gently down like layers of silk. The Silk Road was never just about the destination or even the journey, it was about the transformation that happened along the way. Goods changed hands, ideas evolved, languages borrowed words from one another. A Chinese trader might return home after years abroad speaking Persian, his children growing up bilingual, their family tree a map of the routes themselves. Let the rhythm of ancient commerce lull you into dreams, the clink of coins being counted, the rustle of silk being unfolded, the creak of laden camels settling down for the night. These sounds echoed for over 1,000 years, a constant background music to human connection and exchange, proof that even in the ancient world, we were never truly separate, never truly alone, always reaching across distances to touch, to trade, to understand. As stars begin to illuminate the desert sky, let us walk together through the final centuries of the classical Silk Road, when the world stood on the edge of transformation, when old routes began to fade and new paths opened across the oceans. The decline of the Silk Road was not a sudden collapse but a gradual fading, like twilight slowly surrendering to night. The primary catalyst came with the fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Turks in 1453 CE. This momentous event didn't close the trade routes immediately, but it shifted the balance of power in ways that made overland trade increasingly difficult and expensive. The Ottoman Empire now controlled the vital crossroads between East and West, and while trade continued, European merchants found themselves paying higher tariffs and facing more complex negotiations. This economic pressure became one of the driving forces behind the Age of Exploration, as European powers sought maritime routes to bypass the Ottoman-controlled lands entirely. Breathe slowly and let your mind drift to the courts of medieval Europe, where pepper was so valuable it was counted out peppercorn by peppercorn, where a pound of saffron cost the same as a horse, and where the wealthy displayed their status by serving heavily spiced foods at banquets. These spices, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, ginger, arrived via the Silk Road after journeys of many months, their prices multiplying with each middleman. A spice that left the Maluku Islands worth 1 gold coin might sell in London or Paris for 50 times that amount, or more. This incredible markup meant that whoever could find a direct route to the source of these spices would become unimaginably wealthy, spurring explorers like Vasco da Gama and Christopher Columbus to risk everything seeking new paths to the east. Now picture the precious metal that flowed along these routes in quantities that would reshape economies: silver. From the 16th century onward, silver from Spanish mines in the Americas began flowing across the Pacific to Manila in the Philippines, and from there to China, where demand for silver was insatiable. The Chinese economy operated on a silver standard, and the Ming Dynasty required tax payments in silver rather than goods. It's estimated that between 1/3 and 1/2 of all silver mined in the Americas between 1500 and 1800 eventually ended up in China, creating one of history's most significant transfers of wealth and establishing a truly global economy for the first time. This silver trade created a connection between the Americas, Europe, and Asia that made the world smaller than it had ever been before. Let yourself relax as we contemplate the city of Venice, that luminous republic built on water and commerce. Venice became Europe's gateway to the Silk Road during the medieval period, its merchants establishing trading colonies in Constantinople and other eastern ports. Venetian merchants, including the Polo family, grew wealthy acting as intermediaries between East and West. The city's famous glassmakers learned their techniques partly through contact with Syrian glassmakers encountered via Silk Road trade networks, and Venetian glass became so prized that the glassmakers of Murano were forbidden to leave the island, lest they share their secrets with competitors. Venice's wealth, built on controlling access to Silk Road goods, funded the magnificent architecture and art of the Renaissance, demonstrating how trade routes could literally reshape civilization's cultural landscape. Close your eyes and consider a silent killer that traveled these routes, the plague bacterium Yersinia pestis. Modern DNA evidence suggests that the Black Death originated in Central Asia, possibly near Lake Issyk-Kul in modern Kyrgyzstan, where archaeological evidence shows a spike in deaths in the late 1330s. From there, the disease traveled along Silk Road trade routes, reaching the Crimea by 1347, carried by merchant ships to Mediterranean ports, and spreading throughout Europe with devastating speed. Between 1347 and 1353, the plague killed an estimated 75 to 200 million people, roughly 1/3 to 1/2 of Europe's entire population. The very networks that had brought prosperity and cultural exchange also demonstrated humanity's interconnectedness in the most tragic way imaginable, showing that diseases, like ideas and goods, recognized no borders. Rest peacefully as we turn to the remarkable journey of religious texts and sacred objects. Buddhist sutras traveled from India to China, often carried by devoted monks who spent years or even decades on pilgrimages. The famous Chinese monk Xuanzang journeyed to India in 629 CE, spending 17 years traveling through Central Asia, studying at the great Buddhist University of Nalanda, and returning to China in 645 CE with hundreds of Sanskrit texts. His journey became legendary, eventually inspiring the classic Chinese novel Journey to the West, though the fantastical tale of the Monkey King bears little resemblance to Xuanzang's actual scholarly expedition. The texts he brought back were translated into Chinese, profoundly influencing the development of Buddhism in East Asia and demonstrating the Silk Road's role as a conduit for spiritual knowledge. Let your breathing deepen as we consider the sophisticated credit and banking systems that continued to evolve along these routes. By the late medieval period, Italian banking families like the Medici had established branches across Europe and the Mediterranean, creating letters of credit that merchants could use to conduct business without transporting large quantities of gold or silver. Meanwhile, in the Islamic world, the concept of sak, or written order to pay money, evolved into what we now call a check. These financial innovations, born from the practical needs of long-distance trade, laid the groundwork for modern banking systems and demonstrated that trust, reputation, and paper could be as valuable as precious metals. Sink deeper into tranquil rest as you imagine the final caravans of the classical Silk Road era, growing fewer and farther between as the 16th and 17th centuries progressed. The opening of maritime routes around Africa to India and beyond meant that ships could carry far more cargo than any camel caravan, and do so more quickly and cheaply. What had taken months overland now took weeks by sea. The great oasis cities began their slow decline, their bustling markets growing quieter, their caravanserais welcoming fewer and fewer travelers. Yet the Silk Road never truly died, it transformed. Even as the maritime routes dominated global trade, overland connections persisted in regional trade networks. Local merchants still traveled between cities, though no longer as part of vast transcontinental journeys. The knowledge, crops, technologies, and cultural exchanges that had flowed along these routes for over a millennium had permanently altered every civilization they touched. The world that emerged in the 16th century was fundamentally different from the one that existed when Zhang Qian first ventured westward nearly 2,000 years before. Feel the weight of history settling around you like the softest blanket. The Silk Road was more than a commercial network, it was proof of humanity's eternal desire to reach beyond the horizon, to discover what lay over the next mountain range, across the next desert, beyond the next sea. It showed that people of vastly different cultures, speaking different languages, worshipping different gods, could find common ground in the simple act of exchange. Let your thoughts drift like sand carried on desert winds, each grain a story, each dune a century. The merchants and monks, the soldiers and scholars, the adventurers and artists who walked these paths are long gone, their individual names mostly forgotten. But their collective legacy remains, a world connected, transformed, enriched by the courage to journey into the unknown and the wisdom to learn from strangers who became friends, from foreigners who became family, from distant lands that became, through patient travel and persistent exchange, a little less distant with each passing caravan. As the moon climbs higher in the velvet sky, let us explore the legacy of the Silk Road in the centuries after its decline, and discover how these ancient paths continue to whisper their influence into our modern world. The decline of the overland Silk Road didn't happen everywhere at once. In fact, certain sections remained vibrant well into the 18th and even 19th centuries. The routes through Central Asia continued to carry trade between regional powers, the Qing dynasty in China, the Mughal Empire in India, and the Persian Safavid Empire. Russian expansion southward and eastward through Siberia and Central Asia during the 17th and 18th centuries created new dynamics along northern portions of the old routes. The city of Bokhara, in modern Uzbekistan, remained a crucial trading center until well into the 1800s, its madrasas and mosques still attracting scholars and merchants from across the Islamic world. It was only with the coming of railroads and steamships in the late 19th century that these last vestiges of the classical Silk Road finally faded into memory. Breathe deeply and let your mind wander to the rediscovery of the Silk Road by European explorers and archaeologists in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Adventurers like Aurel Stein, Sven Hedin, and Paul Pelliot ventured into the deserts of Central Asia, uncovering the buried ruins of cities that had been abandoned for centuries. Stein, a Hungarian-British archaeologist, made several expeditions between 1900 and 1916, discovering ancient manuscripts, artworks, and artifacts buried beneath the shifting sands. In the ruins of the Taklamakan Desert, he found perfectly preserved documents written on paper, silk, and wooden languages that hadn't been spoken in 1,000 years: Chinese, Sanskrit, Sogdian, Tibetan, a multilingual archive that revealed the cosmopolitan nature of these ancient trading cities. Now let yourself drift as you contemplate the astronomical knowledge that traveled these routes. Ancient Greek astronomical texts made their way eastward, influencing Chinese and Islamic astronomy. The astrolabe, a sophisticated instrument for measuring the positions of stars and planets, was developed by Greek astronomers, refined by Islamic scholars during the Islamic Golden Age between the 8th and 13th centuries, and eventually traveled both east to China and west to medieval Europe. Islamic astronomers like al-Sufi, working in 10th century Persia, made detailed observations of the night sky that built upon both Greek knowledge and indigenous Persian and Indian astronomical traditions. This synthesis of knowledge from multiple civilizations, facilitated by Silk Road connections, advanced humanity's understanding of the cosmos in ways no single culture could have achieved alone. Rest peacefully as we consider the movement of musical instruments and musical traditions along these ancient routes. The lute, that elegant stringed instrument central to European medieval and Renaissance music, descended from the Arabic oud, which itself had roots in Persian instruments that traveled the Silk Road. When you hear a Spanish guitar, you're hearing echoes of musical traditions that journeyed from Persia through the Arab world to Moorish Spain. Similarly, the pipa, a 4-string Chinese lute, arrived in China from Central Asia during the Northern Wei dynasty, between 386 and 534 CE. carried by musicians traveling the Silk Road. Even the very concept of certain musical scales and modes traveled these routes, with the Persian dastgah system influencing musical traditions from Turkey to India to Central Asia. Close your eyes and picture the thousands of archaeological sites that now dot the landscapes of the Silk Road, many still waiting to be fully excavated and studied. The ancient city of Jiaohe in western China, built on a plateau between two rivers, stands as a haunting testament to Silk Road civilization, its ruins remarkably well preserved by the arid climate, with the remains of streets, homes, temples, and government buildings still visible after more than 1,000 years of abandonment. The city thrived from the 2nd century BCE until the 14th century CE, when it was finally destroyed during conflicts in the late Yuan dynasty. Walking through these ruins today, you can still trace the outline of a Buddhist monastery, a Christian church, and residential quarters, all within the same small city, physical evidence of the religious and cultural diversity that characterized Silk Road communities. Let your breathing slow as we reflect on how the Silk Road influenced the development of languages themselves. Words traveled along these routes just as surely as goods and people. The English word paradise comes from the ancient Persian word paradisa, meaning an enclosed garden, which traveled through Greek and Latin before reaching English. Candy comes from the Arabic kandi, derived from the Sanskrit kanda, meaning crystallized sugar. Bazaar is Persian, caravan is Persian, orange derives from Sanskrit through Persian and Arabic. Even the word silk itself may have traveled from the Chinese si through various Central Asian languages. Our modern vocabularies are living maps of ancient trade routes, each borrowed word a small piece of luggage carried across centuries. Sink deeper into tranquil rest as you contemplate the China's Modern Belt and Road Initiative, announced in 2013, which explicitly invokes the historical Silk Road as inspiration for a massive infrastructure project connecting Asia, Europe, and Africa through land and maritime routes. This ambitious plan involves building roads, railways, ports, and pipelines across dozens of countries, seeking to recreate the economic integration that the ancient Silk Road once provided. Whether this modern revival will succeed or how it will reshape global economics and politics remains to be seen, but the very fact that world leaders invoke the Silk Road name demonstrates the enduring power of these ancient connections in our collective imagination. Feel yourself drifting now, suspended between past and present, between the ancient caravans and modern highways. The Silk Road lives on in ways both visible and invisible, in the food we eat, the words we speak, the music we hear, the technologies we use. That Chinese paper you write on, that Arabic numeral system you calculate with, that Indian spice in your kitchen, that Persian word in your vocabulary, all traveled routes worn smooth by millions of footsteps across thousands of years. The merchants are gone, the camels are gone, the great caravanserais stand empty beneath endless skies. But the connections remain, woven into the very fabric of human civilization like threads of silk, stronger than steel, more enduring than stone. We are all inheritors of the Silk Road, all beneficiaries of the courage and curiosity of those who refused to believe that mountains were barriers, that deserts were impassable, that differences were insurmountable. Let the rhythm of ancient journeys carry you deeper into peaceful sleep, each breath a mile traveled, each heartbeat a city passed. The Silk Road whispers still, in quiet moments, in the spaces between thoughts, reminding us that we have always been travelers, always been traders, always been seekers of connection across the vast and beautiful distances that both separate and unite us. As night deepens and the stars will slowly overhead, let us journey through the quieter stories of the Silk Road, the daily lives, the innovations, and the enduring mysteries that still capture our imagination today. Breathe slowly and imagine the translators who made all this exchange possible, the unsung heroes of the Silk Road who stood between cultures and made communication flow like water finding its path. In the great trading cities, professional translators were essential, often multilingual individuals who might speak Chinese, Sogdian, Persian, and Arabic. The Sogdians, an Iranian people whose homeland lay in modern Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, became the premier merchants and translators of the Silk Road between the 4th and 8th centuries CE. Their language became a lingua franca of trade, used in commercial documents and correspondence from China to the Mediterranean. Sogdian merchants established communities and cities across Asia, creating networks of trust and kinship that spanned thousands of miles, and their letters, discovered preserved in watchtowers and ruins, reveal intimate details of family life, business dealings, and the challenges of living far from home in service of commerce. Let your mind settle on the sophisticated irrigation systems that made life possible in the desert oasis cities. The Khanate system, developed in ancient Persia possibly as early as the 1st millennium BCE, used underground channels to transport water from mountain aquifers to arid lowlands, sometimes over distances of dozens of miles. These engineering marvels required immense planning and labor. Workers had to dig vertical shafts every few dozen meters to excavate and maintain the underground tunnels, which had to be precisely angled to allow water to flow by gravity alone. The technology spread along the Silk Road, with Khanates appearing in Afghanistan, Central Asia, and eventually reaching as far as Western China and North Africa. Some of these ancient Khanates still function today, still carrying water to cities after more than 2,000 years, a testament to the engineering genius of ancient civilizations. Now drift peacefully as you contemplate the food exchanges that transformed cuisines across continents. Noodles, one of humanity's most beloved foods, have origins that remain debated. Both China and Italy claim ancient noodle-making traditions. Archaeological evidence suggests that noodles were being made in China at least 4,000 years ago, with the oldest known noodles discovered at the Lagia archaeological site, preserved in an overturned bowl for millennia. Whether noodles traveled from east to west along the Silk Road, or whether they were independently invented in multiple places, remains uncertain. But what's clear is that the Silk Road facilitated the exchange of cooking techniques, ingredients, and culinary ideas that enriched food traditions from one end of Eurasia to the other. Rest deeply as we consider the role of women in Silk Road trade, often overlooked in historical accounts. While most merchants and travelers were men, women participated in crucial ways. They managed businesses when their husbands traveled, maintained family networks across cities, and in some cases, engaged in trade themselves. In Tang Dynasty China, which flourished from 618 to 907 CE, women enjoyed relatively greater freedom than in later Chinese dynasties, with some noblewomen and wealthy merchants' wives participating directly in business ventures. Letters discovered in the Dunhuang caves include correspondence from women managing commercial affairs, and records show that women could own property and engage in legal contracts related to trade. The wives and daughters of merchants were often the keepers of cultural exchange, learning foreign languages and customs, and sometimes marrying into merchant families from other cultures, creating bonds that strengthened trade networks. Close your eyes and picture the camel itself, that remarkable creature that made the Silk Road possible. The Bactrian camel, with its 2 humps and thick winter coat, was perfectly adapted to the extreme continental climate of Central Asia, able to withstand temperatures from 40 degrees below zero in winter to over 100 degrees in summer. These animals could detect water sources from miles away, a sense so refined that caravans would sometimes let the camels lead when human guides were uncertain of the path. A camel could remember routes traveled years before, and experienced-led camels were prized possessions, worth many times the value of ordinary pack animals. During the height of Silk Road trade, it's estimated that hundreds of thousands of camels were employed in caravans at any given time, creating a vast support economy of camel breeders, veterinarians, and camel handlers whose expertise was as valuable as any merchant's trading acumen. Let yourself drift as you contemplate the standardization of weights and measures that facilitated trade. Different regions used different systems, creating constant challenges for merchants who had to convert between standards. Some empires along the Silk Road attempted to establish standard weights. Archaeologists have discovered bronze weights from various periods, often shaped like animals or decorated with inscriptions guaranteeing their accuracy. The Chinese used a system based on the tale, while Persian merchants used the mythical, and each city might have its own local variations. Professional assayers and weight keepers operated in major trading centers, their honesty and reputation crucial to maintaining trust in commercial transactions. The gradual influence of these various systems on one another, the borrowing and adaptation of measurement standards, represents another form of cultural exchange, less romantic than art or philosophy but equally essential to human cooperation. Breathe slowly and imagine the role of falconry along the Silk Road, a practice that traveled from Central Asia to become beloved by nobility from China to medieval Europe. Falconry likely originated among the nomadic peoples of the Central Asian steppes, possibly as early as 2000 BCE, as both a practical hunting method and a prestigious sport. The practice spread in all directions along trade routes. Persian nobles prized their hunting birds, Arab falconers developed sophisticated training methods, and by the medieval period, European aristocracy considered falconry an essential noble pursuit. The Mongols were particularly renowned falconers, and Marco Polo described in wonder how Kublai Khan hunted with thousands of trained birds. This shared passion for falconry created common ground between rulers of vastly different cultures, with hunting birds occasionally given as diplomatic gifts, their value sometimes exceeding that of horses or precious metals. Rest peacefully now as we turn to the medical knowledge that flowed along these routes. Greek medical texts, particularly the works of Galen and Hippocrates, traveled eastward and were translated into Arabic, Persian, and eventually Chinese. Meanwhile, Indian Ayurvedic medicine, with its sophisticated understanding of herbs and treatments, spread both west and east. Chinese medical practices, including acupuncture and herbal remedies, gradually became known in Central Asia and beyond. The great Islamic physicians of the medieval period, like Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna, whose medical encyclopedia The Canon of Medicine was written in the 11th century CE, synthesized Greek, Persian, and Indian medical knowledge into comprehensive works that would be used in both Islamic and European medical schools for centuries. The materia medica, the knowledge of medicinal plants and their uses, expanded dramatically as doctors learned about healing plants from distant lands, with ingredients like Chinese rhubarb, Arabian frankincense, and Indian turmeric all finding their way into medical treatises across multiple civilizations. Let your mind settle on one final marvel, the art of carpet weaving, perfected in Persia and Central Asia, which became one of the most prized exports along the Silk Road. The oldest surviving carpet, the Pazyryk carpet discovered in a Siberian burial mound, dates to the 5th century BCE and displays already sophisticated weaving techniques, suggesting the art form was ancient even then. Persian carpets, with their intricate patterns and rich colors derived from natural dyes, indigo for blue, madder root for red, saffron for gold, required months or even years of painstaking work by skilled artisans. A single large carpet might represent tens of thousands of knots, each tied by hand, creating images of gardens, hunting scenes, or geometric patterns that carried symbolic meanings. These carpets traveled as luxury goods to China, India, and eventually Europe, where they were so valuable that paintings show them displayed on tables rather than floors, too precious to walk upon. Feel yourself sinking deeper into restful sleep, surrounded by the treasures of the Silk Road, Silk so fine it flows like water, carpets soft as clouds, spices filling the air with distant promises, jade cool against your skin. These material wonders were never just objects but ambassadors of culture, carriers of human creativity, bridges between worlds that would otherwise never have touched. The Silk Road taught humanity a profound lesson, that distance need not mean separation, that differences need not mean conflict, that the foreign can become familiar through patient exchange. Every merchant who learned a new language, every artist who incorporated a foreign motif, every cook who experimented with an exotic spice, every reader who pondered a translated text was participating in a grand human project of connection and understanding. Let the gentle rhythm of camel bells fade into the distance as sleep embraces you. The ancient roads are quiet now, the markets empty, the caravanserais silent. But their legacy lives on in every moment of cultural exchange, every act of reaching across differences to find common ground, every journey that begins with curiosity and ends with understanding. The Silk Road reminds us that we have always been one world, one human family, traveling together through time.